welcome back, everyone. Well, we're going to be continuing some of our coverage today about the raid on Mar-a-Lago. Well, and more so, and we'll go into some stuff. Some updates on that coming up soon, actually. A big update, actually, very soon. But we're going to be talking with the free market economist Thomas DiLorenzo, basically about how this new Democrat spending bill is a socialist wish list. I'm going to be detailing what's in it, what it means for America, and basically, look, you don't spend $700 billion to try to save $300 billion and then say you're saving people money. You know what I mean? Which is what they're doing. I'm going to explain what they're doing with the IRS, what this means for America, and we're going to go pretty in depth today. Again, with our guest, that's going to be Thomas DiLorenzo. Also, folks, I want to detail first of all what's happening with China, though, because with China right now, actually, things are pretty dicey, just being blunt. And the reality is, you might have seen my headline today, the idea of a Chinese sneak attack. I actually weighed on whether I should use that as a headline because it sounds a bit crazy, to be honest. But if you go in actual Chinese military doctrine, the Chinese Communist Party, they say that if there is a war with the United States, their strategy necessitates surprise attack. And they have a specific military strategy designed especially for the United States. There's two words for it. It's a trump card program or the assassin's mace program. I'm going to be detailing this today and talk about the reality of it. Would China launch a surprise attack on the United States, especially at a time when the U.S. is destabilized, which it unfortunately is right now? First of all, though, folks, again, if you're on YouTube, Rumble, we will jump over exclusively to Epic TV after about 20-25 minutes. And also, again, we're going to have a special guest today talking about the Democrat spending bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, the Green New Deal in disguise, socialist wish list, whatever you want to call it. So be sure to stick around for that. All right, that said, let's talk more about this. And also on the Trump Mar-a-Lago raid, I have something big in the works. Announcement soon on that. All right, folks, let's go more into this. So let's start off with the Chinese Communist Party. Is kind of, again, as things are going on right now with Mar-a-Lago, with the Biden administration, with Trump, I mean, basically right now, I would say the CCP has never been closer to really starting a war over Taiwan. If that happens, Japan is very likely to get pulled into it. If that happens, the United States will very likely get pulled into it. Very likely that would be bipartisan. Pelosi herself even went to Taiwan very recently. And so it could pop off. Let's just be real about it. The current state of the war, essentially, as it's developing, I shouldn't call it a war yet, but the current state of the conflict as it's developing, the Chinese Communist Party has encircled Taiwan. And what they're doing looks a lot like a castle siege, where you just surround the castle and you cut off its supplies, and you just stay there until they give up. Actually, I was on War Room Pandemic just recently, in fact, over the weekend, and I was talking to Steve Bannon about this, and this is what I said, basically. The Chinese Communist Party is very smart when it comes to this. I mean, smart or devious, however you want to put it. They know that they can't just, basically raid Taiwan. They can't just roll up on their boats and get on the beach and just take over Taiwan. It would be devastating for them. As I won't go over the whole thing again, but Taiwan is basically like a bastion state. It's an island with cliff sides, with underground bases, underground military bases. Most of them are there. It would be like a combination of D-Day and Iwo Jima combined, where you again have the very rough, very dangerous landing for any kind of military craft because of all the defenses. And then once you're on land, you're fighting an Iwo Jima type battle because they have underground military bases. It would be devastating, absolutely devastating for the Chinese military. And so what they're doing right now, and we'll see how this develops, is they're surrounding Taiwan. They're doing this under the guise of military exercises. They brought the warships, the CCP brought its warships around Taiwan, and they're staying there. Now, we'll see how this develops, but in its current state, again, this is very much like a castle siege. And if you understand Chinese military doctrine, not just under the CCP, but going further back, when you talk about games like Go, for example, kind of like one of the Chinese versions of chess, you could say. The idea is surrounding your enemy on 3 sides, not 4 sides. You leave one opening. This goes back to even Sun Tzu, right? You never surround an enemy on all sides, because an enemy surrounded on all sides becomes desperate and they become very dangerous. They leave one opening, and that opening is to China, to mainland China. The Taiwanese government basically will have a choice. Do they basically hold out? I mean, if it goes to this level, it's not quite there yet, but if it goes to this level, do they hold out? Or do they give up and ally with the Chinese Communist Party, surrender? This is how things are developing right now. Now, on this note, the Chinese Communist Party just fired missiles over Taiwan for the first time. Previously in history, they have fired missiles into the Taiwan Strait, into the ocean. They fired these over Taiwan. Post-Millennial says this. They say the Chinese military fires missiles over Taiwan for the first time ever. It says China launched missiles over Taiwan over the weekend, and the missiles are part of China's multiple launch rocket system, MLRS, which are believed to be the Chinese version of HIMARS, which the U.S. sent to Ukraine to battle Russia. Now, given this situation, the CCP is threatening war against the United States if the United States intervenes. The United States is positioning itself in such a way that it looks like it will intervene, even though they won't say it publicly. Biden has said it publicly. Ironically, his pretty much the mainstream press and everyone around Biden is like, basically, don't listen to Biden because he says things he doesn't mean. they're not saying he's senile, but they're saying basically he acts like he's senile, basically. That's the irony of it. But Biden has said we would defend Taiwan, although the White House and other branches, the media, they have kind of like covered for him and said he didn't mean to say that, basically. But the U.S. is positioning itself in such a way that it very likely would. If the CCP thinks it's going to get in a shooting war with the United States, if it believes that this is going to happen, if it believes that it will invade Taiwan and the U.S. will intervene, the CCP would prepare for that. And an actual CCP military doctrine, they say in such a case, if they were to wage war against the United States, they would always preempt it with a surprise attack. Now, this is not just me saying this. I'm going to go and show some older documents and older reports, but let me show you some of the new things on this. The Sun is reporting this. They say, Code Red, China convinced it needs to hit U.S. with Pearl Harbor-style surprise attack in order to win a war over Taiwan, expert warns. And it says, China is convinced it needs to hit America hard and early in a surprise Pearl Harbor-style attack to invade Taiwan. A leading expert has warned. And it says further in, it comes as massive Chinese military exercises are currently taking place off Taiwan following the visit by U.S. politician Nancy Pelosi. This is Sun UK. Mastro, this expert, believes the most likely way such a conflict would play out is with a Pearl Harbor-style attack on U.S. forces in the region. It would be designed to try to knock out U.S. forces so they could not react to stop China gaining a foothold in Taiwan, which it regards as its territory. Now, interesting thing, even though people are talking about it right now, they're kind of missing the actual meat of the reports, because the CCP has documented texts about this. There are actual military reports public about this. In fact, the CCP has an entire military plan built around this. Again, that's the Assassin's Maze program. I'm going to be going into this in a bit. First of all, though, folks, we do have a sponsor today. Today's sponsor is American Hartford Gold. Inflation is at its highest level in 40 years. Interest rates are skyrocketing, and a recession looms ahead of us, especially if we go to war. Caught between runaway inflation and a recession, our retirement accounts are in real danger. If you want to protect your future, you can call American Hartford Gold. They can show you how to protect your savings and retirement accounts by diversifying your portfolio with physical gold and silver. All it takes to get started is a short phone call, and they'll have physical gold and silver delivered right to your door or into your IRA or 401k. And they make it easy. They have an A-plus rating from the Better Business Bureau and thousands of satisfied clients. If you call them right now, they'll give you up to $2,500 of free silver and a free safe on your first qualifying order. So don't wait. Call them now. That's 877-260-2764, 877-260-2764, or text Joshua to 65532. And again, big thanks out to American Hartford Gold for sponsoring today's episode. Now, a bit deeper into this, I mentioned that if China believes, the CCP believes that we will go to war with them, if they believe the U.S., Japan, maybe Australia, even India possibly, will invade China or wage a war against China to defend Taiwan, and they are going to attack Taiwan, they would, under their own military doctrine, very likely preempt that with a surprise attack against the United States. And again, this isn't just like hyperbole. I'm not trying to be like extravagant in my statements. I'm not trying to say things that are just kind of shocking. They actually have documents on this. A lot of this goes back to 2009, actually. Now, there was a book called The Kingdom and the Quarry by David Uren, which actually revealed a 2009 Australian Defence white paper that detailed some of this. And this came out several years later in 2012. But the interesting thing was that around that time was when Barack Obama launched the Asia Pivot, where he pivoted a lot of the U.S. Navy to the Asia Pacific region. In the kind of the military, reporter community, the national defense community, and I was a national defense reporter for several years. This was pretty widely interpreted as him kind of responding to the basically documents that suggested the CCP was planning to attack the United States back in 2009, and then really planning to allegedly back in 2012. Now, some of this was revealed in 2012, again in this book, which had, again, leaked documents. And let me show you, actually, my report from that time. This is Epic Times in 2012. I wrote this one back then. I've been with Epic Times since 2006. It says, Australia part of U.S. strategy to nullify Chinese war. And this was important because basically what it detailed was that the CCP, again, was planning a surprise attack on the United States. As part of that, the U.S. had built a strategy to nullify that, to prevent that scenario from happening, and Australia played a role in that strategy against the CCP. This was kind of happening behind the scenes in 2012. Now, on this, it says David Uren, well, I write this, David Uren outlined in his book, citing Ross Baggage, this is again David Uren, the author of The Kingdom and the Quarry, Ross Baggage, Managing Director of Strategy International, an Australian national security consulting organization. He states that the Chinese military's, quote, this is a quote, strategy for the Western Pacific potentially involves 4 steps. First, blind the U.S., the United States surveillance and reconnaissance systems, and damage command, control, and communication networks with cyber, missile, and space attacks. Then launch large preemptive attacks on U.S. and Japanese bases and forces with missiles, aircraft, and special force raids, possibly extending to facilities in Australia. While this is taking place, he states, quote, there will be multiple missile and submarine attacks on U.S. naval bases. Finally, PLA, People's Liberation Army units, would aim to destroy more distant support forces from Hawaii to Alaska, Singapore, and Australia. Now, let me break that down a bit. So basically, explaining this, if you were to talk to people in NATO or the United Nations or even just any U.S. adversary in general, adversary or not, they view the strength of the United States basically in air support. A lot of them would say the main strength of the United States is in air support and in command and control. Our command and control systems are very good. Our air support for troops is very good. Where essentially you can have even a few, squads essentially, like a special forces squad, with the whole support of naval, intelligence and air support, and a small squad can decimate very large forces of enemies because of that support. Now, the thing is, all of these systems, command and control, missile guidance systems, navigation, all of that depends on satellites. If the CCP wanted to wage a war in the United States, they would need to first hit the satellites, which is why they're building anti-satellite weapons, ASAT weapons, which they began testing around 2007. They shot down one of their own vessels, and it caused a big stir because it sent all this debris going through orbit, which if you put anything in orbit, it can damage it and even destroy it. Since then, the CCP has developed a lot of technologies with this, not just anti-satellite missiles, you call them ASAT missiles, but also even things like satellites with a robotic arm, or even cheap things like satellites that can just basically little things that go up and just spray paint the lenses on these satellites. So all of the technologies in the U.S. military, when it comes to navigation, not all of them, but a lot of them, navigation, communications, missile targeting, a lot of the things that we rely on to have an effective military tie to satellites. If you take out the satellites, it cuts all of that off. Now, so when it talks about space attacks, cyber, missile, and so on, right, destroying the command and control communication networks, this is what they're talking about. They wanted to launch attacks to basically wipe out the U.S. strategic satellites. Then a preemptive attack on U.S. bases and forces with missiles, which the CCP could do because, frankly, the U.S. is pretty, I mean, like most militaries, concentrated in a few key areas which you could strike very quickly. And then, of course, extending to U.S. bases in other areas and so on. Chinese naval submarine attacks and so on. Imagine multiple Pearl Harbors simultaneously at every military base we have. That would be what this would look like, essentially. Now, with that being said, of course, that would be devastating for the CCP as well because the U.S. would retaliate. The issue is the CCP basically in its own doctrine. I mean, actually, if you get in the real military doctrine, it's actually worse than this. In fact, if you get into the Assassin's Mace program, which I've been writing about going back to 2012 and earlier, they even talk about using low Earth orbit nuclear detonation, what they call a HEMP attack, HEMP, high Earth orbit nuclear detonation. And the purpose of that would be to basically not nuke America, right? They technically wouldn't do that. But what they would do is a HEMP attack, which again is a low Earth orbit nuclear detonation for the purpose of an EMP blast, which would destroy all the electronic systems, including, I mean, imagine, so basically one thing they'll do is they'll look at part of the intelligence gathering. They look at holidays, busiest times, so on. They would look at things like when are the most cars on the road, when is traffic the heaviest, maybe during rush hour, so on. They would launch a HEMP attack, which would even disable cars. And so, because again, cars, if you have these breakers in the car, right? It would fry the electronics and basically all the cars would be jammed up on the roads. That would be the idea. All the cars would be unusable. All the electronic systems would be unusable. Previous estimates on what that would mean for the United States would basically mean, within maybe 90 days or about a year, about half the country would possibly die. It's pretty serious stuff. The CCP has actual writings about this. They also talk, in addition to that, about microwave weapon attacks and similar unconventional weapons. A lot of these were largely unknown until we had what was called the Havana Syndrome, where U.S. diplomats in Cuba started suffering different types of ailments from what was believed to have been sonic weapons, sound weapons. There are two spectrums. There's the sonic spectrum of sound, and there's the electromagnetic spectrum of light. Microwave weapons would be on the electromagnetic spectrum, as would nuclear HEMP attacks, so on, electromagnetic pulse. Sonic spectrum also has weapons designed around it. And the CCP has been developing both of these, all of which are detailed in its Assassin's Mace program. Now, in 2012, I actually wrote about some of this, and in particular a warning from one of the Chinese generals telling the United States that they were going to launch a surprise attack or would do so. This was 2012. I wrote this one back then. It was called Chinese General Warns U.S. Military of Trump Cards. Trump cards is the other translation of the Assassin's Mace weapons. It says the Chinese military has two very different faces. The one they show on the surface is soldiers, jets, and ships, all with questionable capabilities. The face that China doesn't show, however, is the one that has the U.S. legislators worried. That was in 2012. The other face is what Chinese military thinkers call their Trump cards or Assassin's Mace weapons. They're a collection of weapons and systems designed to allow China to fight a technologically advanced country by disabling technology that would otherwise put China's military at a disadvantage. On June 6, one of China's recently retired generals warned the United States of these weapons. And this is what Lieutenant General Wang Huangguang said. He retired in 2012, and he wrote an opinion piece in China's Global Times, state-run media. He said, "We often speak of trump card equipment." This was before Donald Trump. This is, again, just what they call it. And he said that China will use these weapons suddenly, and warned Americans that in their, quote, pride and arrogance to, quote, not get trampled beneath us. Now, a report from the National Guard Intelligence Center, declassified in 2011 in the United States, detailed some of these weapons. It was one of the only U.S. military documents I've found, and I've followed this for years, again, this is my story, that actually detailed this publicly, because these programs are not talked about much publicly. Although you can find Michael Pillsbury's book, The 100-Year Marathon, where he does detail some of these, and he notes in that book that the only time the U.S. military has lost in a red team, blue team operation where they war game these things was when he applied the Assassin's Mace program. Now, a report, again, from the National Ground Intelligence Center, declassified in 2011, which I have a copy of somewhere, I have to find it. It states, quote, "These modern trump card and Assassin's Mace weapons will permit China's low-technology forces to prevail over U.S. high-technology forces in a localized conflict." And it states that Assassin's Mace weapons include, quote, older or existing technology, while trump cards are, quote, newer technology that has been developed in high secrecy. And it says, I wrote, similar to Wang's claims that China would use these weapons by surprise, the report states, quote, "The element of surprise is critical to both." Again, we're talking right now about the possibility of the CCP launching a surprise attack against the United States. This declassified report, 2011, stated that. Again, the element of surprise is critical to both. And this is specifically in the CCP military program designed specifically to attack the United States. It says the Pentagon's annual report on China's military, released last week, this was 2012, states that China is both, quote, pursuing a variety of air, sea, undersea, space, and counterspace and information warfare systems, and aiming to, quote, dominate the information spectrum in all dimensions of the modern battle space. A key purpose of such weapons will be to blind U.S. military satellites and cut off communication channels. Communication and satellite coverage are the backbone of U.S. military operations. The report cites Chinese military writings that, quote, emphasize the necessity of destroying these systems, including U.S. communication satellites, to blind and deafen the enemy. That's the exact quote from the CCP, to blind and deafen the enemy. Now, in other words, folks, I'm not trying to be sensational in any way. I'm just saying that if there was a war with the CCP, the specific military doctrine the CCP has for that exact scenario would necessitate surprise attack. And so as things get closer to an open conflict with the CCP, this is something to be wary of and aware of, and I wanted to get it out there. All right, that said, folks, we have a guest today. I want to bring on... It's a free market economist, Thomas DiLorenzo. He has the upcoming book, The Politically Incorrect Guide to Economics, where we talk about the Inflation Reduction Act and basically how this is just it's a socialist wish list, folks. This is really the Green New Deal in disguise. It has very little to do with reducing inflation. It's spending over $700 billion, and it's only projected to save about $300 billion in inflation. They're spending more money than they're projected to be saving with this, let's put it that way. Let's talk about what this really is. First, though, let's jump over to Epic TV. And folks, again, if you want a free trial, jump in the description below if you're on YouTube. Grab your free trial. Come check it out. Also, be sure to check out our documentary, The Real Story of January 6th. Get your free trial. Watch both. Come join us for the show. Join us for the live Q&A, and also watch the documentary. A win-win, right? Before we jump over, though, let me show you a new video from Trevor Loudon on his show Counterpunch. Just a quick trailer. He's talking about how the World Economic Forum is deepening its relationship with the Chinese Communist Party. Let me show you this.
Globalism and communism are two manifestations of the same phenomenon. Globalism is communism. Communism is globalism. communism is the senior partner in this enterprise. If the Communist Party of China collapsed tomorrow, the World Economic Forum would be over. On the other hand, the World Economic Forum collapsed tomorrow, the Communist Party of China would just make another one. Klaus Schwab is the puppet of Xi Jinping and the Vladimir Putin. He is just a tool to take down the West.
All right, folks, don't miss that one. In fact, if you talk to a lot of people who've lived under communism and they hear globalism, they say it's the Communist International. When they talk about the Communist International, it's the exact same thing. And so globalism, communism, how they relate, World Economic Forum, the Chinese Communist Party, how they relate. Be sure to check that episode out on Epic TV. All right, let's jump over again to Epic TV. We'll continue our discussion. We'll have on our guest, Thomas DiLorenzo. All right, folks, thanks for being here. Those of you curious, the tea of the day is ginseng tea in my Real Story of January 6 mug. All right, folks, let's bring on Thomas DiLorenzo. Let's welcome him on. Thomas DiLorenzo is a free market economist, author of the upcoming book, The Politically Incorrect Guide to Economics. And Thomas, thanks for being with us.
Pleased to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, yeah, pleasure. Well, you know, the Democrats just released this Inflation Reduction Act, and I know you're a bit critical of it, but you have some good analysis on it. Let's start off by talking about what this really is. This is really about inflation.